fields of earth, growing peacefully beneath a simple sun, were the blossoms of the planet Lophai. Coiling and uncoiling in double dawns, tossing tumultuously under vast suns of jade green and balas-ruby orange, swaying and weltering in rich twilights, in aurora-curtained nights, they resembled fields of rooted serpents that dance eternally to an otherworld music. Welcome, cultured viewers, to this latest episode of Roll Off a Tangent, in which I, Zendexor, and my colleagues, Nikita Zuev, who is absent today but who has sent his views to me, XJ and Anthony Simeone, focus upon The Demon of the Flower by Clark Ashton Smith. This 10-page gem of fantasy fiction appeared in the December 1933 issue of Astounding Stories, and not in his usual outlet, Weird Tales, though it would have been equally apt for either magazine, as the story is both astounding and weird. It is one of the very few examples of a purely extrasolar yarn in the Smith canon. Most of his tales with interstellar settings have at least a slight link with Earth, but this one has none. The other ones similar in this respect that I can think of are the two Xikov tales, The Maze of Mild Web and The Flower Women. The reader is plonked straight onto the plant-dominated world of Lophai, where the humanoids have to obey the will of the chief plant, the Voorqual, expressed in the immemorial sacrifice that has to be paid in blood. The reader is not told, nor do the people in the story know, how the orders were originally communicated to them in aeons gone by, but they know that if they refuse the sacrifice, the consequences will be dire. And so the system continues. Swaying in a slow, lethal, hypnotic rhythm with a deep and solemn sibilation, the Voorqual dominated the city of Lophai and the world Lophai. Below, on the tiers of the pyramid, the thronged ophidian plants kept time to this rhythm in their tossing and hissing. And far beyond Lophai, to the poles of the planet and in all its longitudes, the living blossoms obeyed the sovereign tempo of the Voorqual. The tale describes how King Lunithi tries to rebel when his fiancée is selected for the next sacrifice. He seeks advice from a mineraloid entity, the cryptic Ochlith, that lives in high mountain country far above the influence of the plants. The Ochlith tells him how to slay the Voorqual, but it turns out that Lunithi would have done well to press for more detailed instructions, as indeed the Ochlith invited him to do. I won't say much more, just two main points in conclusion before I refer you to my teammates for their in-depth analyses. First, even by Clark Ashton Smith standards, this is a stunningly well-written piece of prose, and it would be absurd for any reader to die without having read it first. Secondly, like many of his tales, this one points a moral. If you are king of a world oppressed by plants, the chief of which is inhabited by a demon, it's not enough just to kill the plants. And now, who would like to comment first? Anthony or XJ?
I'll let Anthony go ahead. Yeah.
This is another instance in my life, my reading life specifically, where I think to myself that I need to read more of this author's work. I need to read more Clark Ashton Smith and get through more of his body of work, because every time I read a story, I feel like I'm overwhelmed with just this feeling of, first of all, as a writer, inferiority. As a writer, I'm always struggling with inferiority complex, but when I read his work, it's just so descriptive and otherworldly and lyrical I mean, I really enjoy his work, and I really feel like I need to move through his body of work faster because this was another gem. I had never read this one before, and it really does set up with his use of language. Really does set up this ethereal, otherworldly feel and atmosphere, and it it really kind of the world building in the beginning because of that doesn't feel so much of an info dump as with other stories. It feels, if we can compare it to like Lovecraft, his seems very academic in every sense of the word, whereas when he's setting up his world building or setting the scene for one of his stories versus Clark Ashton Smith is just, and I know it's an otherworldly space that we're in. We're on another planet. We're not in, Arkham, Massachusetts or something, as we might be or in some earthly realm. Although I have to say that I was reminded of some of Lovecraft when he does describe otherworldly places. This sort of parallels that. It seems like, I feel like, in its description. But I mean, as far as this tale is, I mean, he sets the scene and then he builds the world very well, and then he goes into the story of this lottery system where they're feeding their people to these vampiric plants, and it sets that up, and that's a sort of a familiar trope, but then it's this guy, he's this one important man, this king, and he gets his wife gets selected, and then it's not good. Then it's the system's BS, and he needs to overturn it, right? So it's all good when other people are being sacrificed, but then so then he has to go on this quest and go to, it's a stone, right? I mean, it's some sort of, so it's seemed like the opposite to me. If anything wanted to kill a plant, would be, or a stone, right? So he goes and goes on this quest and he gets this answer, but then the twist at the end, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but just if we're not going there, but just I thought the ending was great. So just all around, I mean, I really enjoyed it, and thank you for making me read more of Clark Ashton Smith. I appreciate that. So, XJ, your thoughts?
Where do I start, man? Clark Ashton Smith is a poet, I believe. Am I right, Robert?
He's a poet, yes.
Yes. And I am reminded of what my English teacher way back when I was a delinquent student said about poetry. You condense as much meaning as you can into a line of words, and poets are the star of words. And Mr. Fahi, if you ever hear this podcast, I still remember what you said. And what can I say, man? Like the first paragraph, you can see Clark Ashton Smith's background as a poet. It is packed with information into words that are strung up in a really beautiful way. Not as the plants and flowers of earth growing peacefully beneath a simple sun were the blossoms of the planet Lophai. And with that, it already sets the scene. And the next sentence describes to us the nature of the plants, which extremely mobile compared to plants of our planet, and he describes the general atmosphere of the planet within like 3 sentences. That is a very adroit, efficient, beautiful use of words. And efficient and beautiful don't usually go together. It is the mastery of Clark Ashton Smith's mastery of the English language is quite possibly one of the best I've seen from anyone, really. But I'm still uncouth delinquent, so there might be others out there. Who knows? I really like this. I think I've described a few alien flowers in my time, and I am deeply humbled by just the way Clark Ashton Smith described this particular flower. He not only has he used very evocative language to describe what is a very describe what are very I'm gonna have to say mundane descriptions that you would usually find in flowers, like streaks of black on red and stuff like that. But he imbues it with so much poetry that it's a completely different experience reading it. And I think the thing I enjoyed most about this particular story is just simply the language. The world building is quite fascinating, but the use of language just puts everything else into it just outshines everything else. I'm struggling to push myself to talk about the world building. I mean, it's interesting. A world full of plants. Obviously, they have intelligence. That's if you read through the story all the way to the end, there is obviously a lot more to the plants and the relationship it has to the people that populate the world. I think I am going to go with Anthony when I'm not going to spoil it. Maybe we won't actually spoil the end of the story for this podcast. But yeah. I find it really curious to know that there is this that on this planet that you have the plants, of course, and the people who clearly have a connection with the plants, but also the octave is such a enigmatic existence in this setup, because there is you have to wonder what is the relationship between the octave and the plants, and why is it that it's sitting right beside a pool of the most venomous substance to the plants? Like, why? And I don't know if this has any bearing on the story at all, but the octave was described as a demon in the story, but also the octave referred to a demon that lives in the flower. And I'm wondering what's with that. I wonder if it had any bearing. But anyway, these are all signs of very good world building to me, because it gives you enough description but leaves you wondering, and it is a very it makes you want to read more, and it is an open invitation for, I mean, it's not an invitation. It's like an author then has license to continue writing more stories in that world, just because it makes the reader wants to know more about the world. And unfortunately, I don't think there's any follow-up to this particular story. Is there, Robert?
No, I'm afraid not. No, you'd have to write them yourself.
Oh, well, I don't think I'm up to that challenge. I would make a fool out of myself, most likely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, anyway, those are my thoughts. And Robert, why don't you tell us yours and tell us what Nikki thinks?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite Clark Ashton Smith stories, and Clark Ashton Smith is one of my favorite authors. So there you go. It's quite quite obvious to me that this story is one of his most poetic efforts. I've read all his stories. I haven't read all his poems. I've only read a few of his poems, though they're all on his website. They're all shown on his website, the website somebody else did off his works. I mean, Smith himself died in 1961, long before there were websites. If anybody like Anthony is resolving to read more Clark Ashton Smith, then you're in luck because he wrote over 100 stories. So there's a vast uh, treasure trove of them available, and most of them are pretty good. It's hard to find a. In fact, I can't think of any dud Clark Ashton Smith story really. Though some of them are better than others. The
They might be duds compared to if you compare him to himself, I suppose.
Yeah, well, the on the theme of use of language and poetry, some of the heroes of his stories are actually poets. I'm thinking of the White Sibyl and the Monster of the Prophecy and A Rendezvous in Everine. Uh, I wouldn't be surprised if there's more. He's really probably thought of himself as primarily a poet, but he had to write these stories in the mid 1930s to earn money to keep his parents because he was looking after them. Anyway, on something which I can't remember which of you mentioned this, but the mystery of the Oclith and the mystery of the demon. This world Lophai is full of mysteries which the reader just has to accept that he won't ever fathom, and that's really easier to put up with in that the inhabitants of the world are in the same situation. They just have to fatalistically accept the situation they're in, which existed from time immemorial. I think that the fact that the Oclith lives in this mineral realm with all the poisonous stuff bubbling around, that does make sense simply because it's the only part of the planet that the plants are not likely to fill up, and therefore it allows space for something else to live, to evolve, if the Oclith did evolve. And maybe the Oclith, like the demon of the Voorqual, is sui generis, i.e., there's just one of that kind in the universe. There's no reason why all living things should be part of a species. After all, there's some one-offs probably in the universe, and there we have an example. I suppose that's the more fantasy aspect of the story, these one-off things, whereas the other aspects of the world building are more in the spirit and atmosphere of science fiction. I would say that actually this story is balanced really between the two atmospheres of science fiction and on the one hand and fantasy on the other. Quite
You are
unusually
quite right
fine
about that. You're quite
mix.
right about that
Yeah.
because I got really strong Dark Crystal vibes when I was reading this. I don't know if anyone else got it.
What vibes? Sorry.
Dark Crystal. It's the
Oh,
it's an animatronic show by Jim Henson way back when. I'm not talking about the new CGI stuff that they came up with, but the one that went back to the 1980s to Jim Henson's Puppet Workshop. It really had that. It really had that vibe. I don't know. It's like in my mind, it is the world of lo-fi is dry. It's bright. It's scaly. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that for sure. But I wonder if the stone, the Oclith, is in cahoots with the plants, though, based on how the story turned out. I don't know. I wonder. I wonder if there's some sort of, as I feel like XJ may have hinted that you were suspicious of the oclith, correct? I don't know. It seems like they might be it might be working with the flowers or have some sort of
I
deal with the
I
flowers or something.
I don't know if it's so much that they were working with the octave was working with the flower, as in like a very ancient enmity that stretched way back to the furthest reaches of time or whatever, and because I mean, but you might have something there, because the thing that is really fascinating about the Voorqual is the I suppose the ecology is like how it renews itself and things like that, because the ending obviously calls into question a lot of things, primarily the humans. And I love, and I love that Clark Ashton Smith did a bit of foreshadowing here. He said that the humans of Lophai, and I described them as humans only because I can't remember
For
that
want of a
exact.
better word, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that he just dropped that right there, and then just it all became you would just at least for me, what I thought was just like the humans were a little bit off in terms of shape, not precisely humans. But then it's at the ending that Clark Ashton Smith plays a trick on all of us, and he is quite literal in what he said.
I think this is a good point at which I should introduce Nicky Zuev's thoughts on the matter, because he's the most distrustful of us all as far as the ostensible meanings of a tale. And Anthony was a bit distrustful, and I think Zuev would be even more so. I'll read what he says. Here are my thoughts on the demon and the demon of the flower. The story is short yet poignant, as it attempts, and in my humble opinion succeeds, in creating an eerie atmosphere that is aided by world building and characterization of the high priest. And then he goes on to say, I found the ending abrupt. It seemed like it was going to elaborate a bit more, but just sort of ended. I get the big picture, the curse begins anew and so on, though it would be nice to see Clark Ashton Smith's moral of the story section in there somewhere. Well, I don't know. I'll have to disagree with him. I don't know how much more plainly it could be made by the author that the Oclith was trying to nudge King Lunithi, say, look, if you've got anything more to ask, please ask now. Anyway, so Nicky Zueff likes the story, but I personally don't think there's any reason to distrust the ostensible meaning of the story. I think this is a case for just accepting, although for the first time, you chaps have made me wonder whether perhaps the humans of Lophai do have a bit more in common with plants than the humans of Earth do. There may be a sense in which the animal and vegetable kingdoms on that world are not rigidly so segregated.
Without going further into the ending, I think it's quite clear that the whole thing is all part of the same life cycle. It's quite clear.
In science fictional terms, yes, but remember this is partly a fantasy tale, in which case
there's even less rules in fantasy tales.
Yeah. Sorry?
There are even less rules in fantasy tales.
Yes.
So I mean, without going further into the ending of the story, but it really does seem like it's part of the life cycle, and that there's a very specific reason why the the Voorqual would crown its next sacrifice with the cup of its blossom, and all of
Yeah.
that, right? It's there are. I mean, this is why this story is so great, man. It just gives you enough to hint at the what that there's more, and then it makes you want to read more about it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. There
Yeah.
are carnivorous
He,
plants on Earth too, of course.
yeah. But he does hint at, he says, I don't know the exact wording, but there's a point where he says, I think it's early in the story. He says basically, well, I'm telling you the story and I'm calling them humans ostensibly. They're not quite like humans from Earth, but I'll just call them that for the sake of the story, of telling the story. Something to that effect.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
yes, what
Mm.
are they? Yes, how did they come? Are they plant-based, humanoids, that evolved into bipeds like us that are similar to us, but they're more related to plants than animals on that world. So, yeah, that's so he intimates something there. So that's
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
That's the part I was talking about. He was like he told us straight up. These people are not really humans. I'm just calling them humans for convenience sake. And then I was just led into thinking, oh, maybe they got two heads and their limbs are slightly longer and they got an elongated snout or something like that. Something that walks on two legs, kind of like humans, just not really humans. But then at the end, it's like, nope, guys, I mean it literally.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, he raises like a lot of questions, and I think a good story leaves a lot to the imagination and leaves some mystery at the end. It doesn't solve everything, for you, but it's just, what is the, you know, uh, everything right down to, are there actual demons in the flower or a demon in the flower, or is it just that's just what it's considered or called, because it's a
Mm.
malevolent dominating species on this planet. I don't know. And is it literal demons? Is it not? I was questioning that too. But
Yeah.
Mm. Come to think of it,
or is it
it
just
did appear
malevolent?
in a science fiction magazine after all, Astounding Stories. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mm.
in my mind, it leans more to science fiction.
Mm.
The fantasy, I don't really feel a very strong, excuse me, a very strong fantasy vibe. It's maybe the level of civilizational advancement feels like it is fantasy. It has high priests and it has a king and stuff like that, and it's dressed up in some words that is reminiscent of a fantasy
Mm.
story like demons and stuff like that. But um,
Well, my country has a king as well, for that matter.
oh
Yeah.
well, the UK is a fantasy, sure.
Mm.
I would say, yeah, I would agree. It's more science fiction to me. It's fantastical, but is it really fantasy? Is it's
I
more
mean,
Mm.
fantastical to me, but
it's clearly not hard science fiction like
no,
Stephen
no.
Baxter or
Mm.
Isaac
Easy
Asimov.
design, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's clearly not hard science fiction. It's more of
Mm.
those soft science fiction. But yeah, it's there is no magic involved. I don't think there's any magic involved or anything like that.
Yeah, so it's not
Mm.
hard fantasy either.
Yeah, it's a very
It's
nice.
soft fantasy.
Either way, it's a great story. It's like I got to take my hat off again. I just need to talk about the his mastery of words here. It's just amazing, man.
Mm. Mm.
Agreed.
It is 10 pages, but it is some of the best prose I've ever read.
Mm. Mm.
What, better than Lovecraft?
I'm sorry, man. I never really thought Lovecraft was out of the
Mm.
three. Robert E. Howard, H.P. Lovecraft, and Clark Ashton Smith. Clark Ashton Smith is by far the best prose writer of them all. I mean, it's
Mm.
without competition.
I was kidding about the Lovecraft thing. I know I figured you would disagree heartily on
I mean,
Lovecraft, but yeah, it,
to me, Lovecraft has his moments of brilliance, but his language is
right.
more functional than it is poetic, like Clark Ashton Smith. And I don't have a
Mhm.
problem with that. Functional prose is good. Yeah, it's good.
I mean,
But
Howard
Sure.
has his moments as well of poetry. Howard was a poet as well.
yeah,
Um, well, in fact, Lovecraft was. He wrote a collection of poems called Fungi of Yuggoth,
oh
which I
my
have.
God, maybe we should read that one of these days. It'll be a fascinating read.
Mm,
But yeah, like I said, out of the three, Clark Ashton Smith clearly has the upper hand on just his use of language.
mm,
Yeah.
Yeah, I would tend to agree
yeah.
for sure.
I'd like to just say something about plant and this plant and animal business with reference to another author, Olaf Stapledon, who wrote mind-boggling books in the 1930s, Last and First Men and Star Maker. And in Star Maker, he describes a planet ruled by plants, but there it's more explicit that the plant animal combination is more explicit. In the daytime, these creatures put down their roots and sun themselves, and in the night they pull up their roots and move about using the energy they acquired during the day. And it's a riveting it's just 8 pages of the book is devoted to this planet, but it's really spellbinding. The tragedy of the planet is that their nature has to be a dual nature, and if one side gets too dominant, then they go sort of spiritually sick in one way or another. First of all, the animal side gets too dominant, they evolve a technological society that does without their roots, and then there's a reaction against that, and the plant side gets dominant, and they sort of go to sleep, and that's the end of them. Anyway,
Hmm.
it's a really good theme, and I think one could develop the Clark Ashton Smith story into a whole story cycle if one had what I have called, in fact, on my website, I've written about this mental machine you could have called the implicizer, which extracts implications from a story. You would do a
Nice.
sort of Sherlock Holmes on it and extract the implications and write some more on that. It's half a joke, but only half a joke.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of his contemporaries, right? Lovecraft and Howard, how much, especially for Robert Howard, how much pastiche has been written,
Hmm.
using Conan. So why couldn't there be, a pastiche written of this world, the demon and the
Hmm.
flower, and expand upon it?
I'll
So
tell you why. Very intimidating because
that's true.
you want to reach that level of mastery of the language is
Hmm.
very intimidating. I'm not up to the task at all.
No, I don't think I am either, but
No. And
I don't
pastiche
know.
writers don't understand that it's not enough just to nod in the direction of somebody's style. You would need to master it so that you became bilingual, as it were, in your own style and this other person's. And I don't know that anyone has ever succeeded in that kind of endeavor.
What you're saying? Robert Jordan never mastered Howard's style when he wrote.
I certainly am, yes. I certainly am.
I mean, you could
Robert Jordan.
you. I mean,
Good.
writing in someone's style is difficult, but it's not impossible because you know, Tom Clancy is he's not even writing his own novels anymore. He's got a team of ghostwriters writing for him, right? So there probably is a way to make the whole thing a factory, but uh, but to break down something like Clark Ashton Smith, in The Demon of the Flower and to write like him. Ah, man, I don't know. I wouldn't even know where to start.
Yeah. The only other time I felt this experience, like reading a story like this, was if you've I don't have you how much Jack Vance have you read, fellows? Because
Lot.
this really struck me as reading Jack Vance's stories, uh, his more fantastical stories. If that's the feeling I got reading this
Yeah,
story by Smith,
the
was
dying
that
earth.
it's
Yeah.
very otherworldly. Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, it did. I did get a Jack Vance vibe reading this particular story in the ideas that it is in the ideas that it is presenting, which is a really fantastical, more behind the scenes. I'm just going to show you this bit and no more kind of feeling.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
but
got a dying earth vibe. But there's a but. Go ahead, but.
but Jack Vance had a much drier way of writing than Clark Ashton Smith.
Okay.
Jack Vance can get boring sometimes. It's very
I can see that.
some parts are monotonous, and it's very dry. There's nothing happening, or what can be very exciting is described in a very boring way sometimes. But this is different. This is this is like you're not bored anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
I would agree with you. It's definitely very intriguing. I mean, it's a very short tale, so shorter the tale can be very punchy and very impactful. So versus a lot of the Dying Earth stories they're more novellas, right? Or they're interconnected short stories. It's been a while since I've read them, but yeah, I would agree with you. It seems like he's still kind of the better, just from a sheer like the lyricist in Smith is obvious, and the poet is
I
obvious
mean,
in Smith's writing.
there are Clark Ashton Smith story that I didn't take to at all,
Mm.
and that is the coming of the white worm. I don't think I felt very strongly about that one. That is the right story, am I right? The one with the white worm.
Yeah, the coming of the white worm. Yeah.
We covered that one in our duo episode. I wasn't too taken with that, but even then, there's just no nitpicking with Clark Ashton Smith's use of the language.
I'll tell you one example where Clark Ashton Smith can be a bit boring for a few pages, and that's in some of his science fiction stories, not all of them, but some of them where he feels obliged to describe how a machine works. He doesn't like machines, he's said so himself quite often.
That is
And
very interesting.
because obviously the editors of the stories expect some sort of description of a time machine or a space machine or whatever, he feels obliged to supply that description, and it is very boring. In his otherwise very good story, The Monster of the Prophecy, where some interstellar rather cynical wizard comes to make sure that a prophecy on his world is fulfilled, a prophecy saying that when a monster appears on his world, this wizard will become king. So he goes in search of a monster, and he comes to Earth and finds a human to take back to him, because humans are regarded as monsters on this other world. Anyway, it's a good story. It's a humorous story, but the description of the means of interstellar transport is very boring. So it's interesting. Smith can be boring if he's writing about the wrong thing.
Why can you not have a perfect record, Mr. Smith? Shame
Yeah.
on you.
Nobody's perfect.
Oh, I'm so disappointed in you, Mr. Smith.
Nobody's perfect.
Well, you might disagree if you read the story, of course. I don't know. The monster of
Yeah.
the proxy. Anyway.
Well, maybe one day we will, do that.
Yeah.
It's got a
Might
great
be a
ending, one of the
candidate.
best endings of
I
all
mean,
this.
I'll just say one thing. I might every time I read a Clark Ashton Smith, I might not enjoy the story. The Coming of the White Worm is a dud for me, but I will always enjoy his prose. It's just it's like going to a restaurant and you might not like the main dish, but the side dish is always great.
There you go.
I mean there's a Lebanese restaurant near my place. I sometimes I try different mains. I might not like the main. I'm not really partial to fried cauliflower, for instance, but the muhammara is always good.
Yeah, there's a place. There's a place near me too. There's a place near me that's also Lebanese called Li Beirut. I think I'm pronouncing that right, but they have lots of little dishes that come out, and you don't like all of them, but some of them are just okay, but there's one or two that are fabulous. When they bring
Yes.
out all the little dishes of all the different things.
Whenever I go to that Lebanese place, I will always have muhammara. The rest of the stuff doesn't matter, but the muhammara, I must have it.
Yeah.
As the same says, in reading Clark Ashton Smith, man, you might not like the story, but you're always in for a treat with the
Right.
prose.
Yeah. Keeps you coming back. The prose keeps you coming back for more, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I was also reminded one other thing. I mean, just as far as plant people and plant creatures, like human, or actually more like flora, fauna mixed, kind of reminded me a little bit of some Martian stories by Burroughs, like
Oh yeah.
the Princess of Mars, or I forget which book it is, but they travel to this one area of Mars, right, where it's these plant creatures are there, sort of
The
they
gods of
moving
Mars.
half plant, half animal creatures with like mouths in their hands or something.
Yeah, the
Kind of
gods.
vaguely Gods of Mars.
Mm.
Yes, it was the Gods of Mars. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So it's kind of like back in the day, animal like plants were, sort of a thing, I guess in that late 1800s, early 20th century. I don't know.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, I muted myself. There are science fiction writers who had dealt with the plant and animal theme, but I don't particularly. The only one that is done. I haven't read the story that you mentioned before, Robert. The one with where the people root themselves during the day and move around during the night. I believe it is an Orson Scott Card story. I believe it is set in the Ender universe. That there is a he did describe a planet with a life cycle of animals to plants and then back, but other than that particular story, most of the plant and animal theme I'm not particularly taken with, because it sometimes veer towards to me, ridiculous. Yeah. But I guess I guess it really depends on. I guess the thing. So I think for me, what tends to make something ridiculous is the physical description of the beings, and there's a little bit of a creature design issue there. I think, like the what were they? the conical creatures in the shadowy wanderers out of the church time thingamajiggy.
Yeah, the Great Race they were
The
called.
great race,
Great race.
Elith, the Elith.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, that is just a bizarre description, and I haven't read The Gods of Mars. Was that the title you brought up? But the
Yeah.
idea of a mouth on hands just like maybe belongs more to a horror story than it does in a science fiction. I just can't see it as being anything other than ridiculous, really.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's your mileage may vary for sure. It was definitely an interesting kind of choice. I think the creature. I think it had like one eye. The gods of Mars creatures, these plant creatures, were again blood drinkers, or but they had one eye, and they walked around, ran around, and had these hands on. So you could, to me, that's a great adaptation. If you're a blood drinker, you grab something and instead of bringing it to a mouth, you just start draining it through your hands, right? Like through the things that it makes evolutionary sense to me. It's the grabbing device and the eating device all in one appendage.
Yeah, I think there's an Eskimo legend about an old man of the sea of some sort with mouths in his fingers. Reminds
Right.
me. Mm.
This makes sense.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't really have much else to say about Clark Ashton's this particular story anymore, other than, you know what? It's like if you are like me, I'm the kind of reader that if the prose of the story needs to reach a certain standard, otherwise I just can't deal with the story at all.
Mm.
If you are that kind of reader, you will love this story. You will love Clark Ashton Smith, actually, if you are an admirer of well-written prose. So, I guess I really have nothing else to say, other than if any other if our listeners out there like well-written prose, then you gotta check it out. And the best part about all this, right, it's all freely available on the internet. It's like, just search for The Demon in the Flower. It will bring you to the Eldritch Duck website, and it's all there.
Yeah. You better search for the demon of the flower, actually.
The
'cause that's
Demon of the Flower.
Yeah.
Google autofill will help you out there.
So does that mean it's grade time? Does that mean what's the score? The score time?
I don't know, unless either of you have anything else you want to add, because I have nothing bad to say about the story, unfortunately.
Wow.
Well, I've got one more thing to add, which is if you ever see this book in a second-hand shop, this is the collection with the Demon of the Flower in it. And I have 9 volumes of Smith's stories. This is perhaps my favorite of the 9. But they're all, if you see any of them, just grab them.
Yeah, for the benefit of anyone who's just purely listening and not watching the video, that was one of those amazing. I don't know what year that was published, but just those old-fashioned sci-fi, collection covers from
Bruce
decades
Pennington
ago.
was the artist.
What year was that?
Bruce Pennington, the artist.
Bruce Pennington.
The title is called Lost Worlds, Volume 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the cover art is that old classic sort of 60s, 70s sort of art, right? So it's that, at least that's what it looks like to me. So that classic sort of sci-fi cover art. Yeah, so that really adds something to it for me. But yeah, I would definitely look for that and pick that up. But yeah, and so that's amazing. I'm jealous you have it in your collection.
Yes.
Are we on to scores then? Are we scoring? We start with XJ. Do you want to start or?
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10.
Okay.
And it's not higher because that's the end of this story. You know?
Yeah.
There's no more.
So you deducted a point for disappointment that the story wasn't longer.
Mr. Smith, you totally disappointed me. Yeah. How could you?
That's actually a compliment to it, though. But anyway,
all good things have to come to an end, right?
Yeah, well, can't be too kind of Mr. Smith.
I'm going to give it. I mean, if I can be so bold to take the next spot, and I guess since this was Robert's recommendation, he'll go last, right? That's what we usually do. But
yeah, he will give us an inevitable. He will give us an inevitable 100 out of 10.
Right. Last but not least. But for me, I would go. I'm going to go 10 out of 10. Just when I read a story, I want it to transport me. I wanted to take me to this other place, and being, when I was a younger man, that was so much easier. It was easier for a story to take me away, whisk me away to a fantastical place when I was less worldly, less, dare I say, a little more jaded than I am now than I was back then. So it's harder for me as an older man to get transported to a place by a story, but I was, and this story gave me a little bit of an escape for the 10 pages or so of the story. The lyricism of it, again, maybe I'm overusing that word, but the poetry, the lyricism of it, of the prose, really impressed me, and it continues to do so when I read his work. I feel like the tale itself really was a short epic, if I can describe it that way. So I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10 for all those reasons for this experience of this story.
Yep.
So Robert, take us home.
100 out of 10 for sure. What do we even need to ask?
I'll give it a 10 out of 10, which no doubt.
No, you're going to give it 12 out of 10?
Well, the thing is, I used to teach mathematics, and I don't want any of my pupils to start.
Oh my God, Nikki! Oh, you're not here.
But anyway, yeah, 10 out of 10, and Nikita Zuev gives it an 8.5 out of 10, which means he's given it the lowest score. But anyway, not very far below XJ's score of 9. So
yeah,
so
there we go. I guess we can end this podcast with admonition to everyone to go check out this story, man. It's really good. It's a gem. It's a total gem.
Yeah.
And
do yourself a favor.
Do yourself a favor, exactly. And with that, well, like and subscribe and all that jazz. Give us suggestions, whatever, and have a great day.
Yeah.
Have a good one. Signing off.
Bye-bye.
Adios.
Thank you.